The courtroom was silent as Judge Caprio leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Across the room, a man in his late 30s stood nervously, clutching a folder of papers. "You're telling me," the judge began, "that you knowingly parked illegally because you had no choice?" The man nodded, his voice trembling. "Yes, Your Honor. My mother, she was too sick to walk." What happened next would leave everyone in that room with tears in their eyes and a renewed faith in humanity. Mark Harris approached the stand with a hesitant shuffle, his steps echoing faintly in the solemn quiet of the courtroom. He was an unassuming man with kind, tired eyes that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken struggles. His clothes, a worn-out shirt and faded slacks, told the story of a life filled with hard work, not one of leisure or ease. Despite his humble appearance, there was a quiet dignity in his demeanor that caught the attention of everyone in the room. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from his desk, his warm gaze softening the edges of the formal proceedings. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," he said, his voice infused with genuine kindness. "How are you today?" Mark hesitated for a moment, his lips twitching into a faint, almost apologetic smile. "I've been better, Your Honor," he replied, his tone polite yet heavy with underlying exhaustion. The judge leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyebrows rising in a playful arch. "I bet you have," he quipped, eliciting a ripple of chuckles from the audience. "Let's see what brings you here today. Parking violations? Well, you're not exactly in the mob, are you?" His comment brought another wave of light laughter, momentarily easing the tension in the room. Mark managed a small, sheepish grin, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "No, sir, just bad luck, I guess," he replied, his voice humble and self-deprecating. Judge Caprio glanced at the paperwork in front of him, his expression thoughtful but still laced with humor. "Let's hear your story, Mr. Harris. Why were you parked in a no-parking zone? Surely there must be a reason." Mark took a deep breath, his gaze shifting momentarily to the floor as he gathered his thoughts. When he looked back up, his eyes glistened with a mix of vulnerability and quiet resolve. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, I was taking my mother to her doctor's appointment. She's been battling cancer, and the closest parking spot was too far for her to walk. I knew it was a no-parking zone, but I didn't have a choice." The courtroom fell silent, the gravity of his words sinking into the hearts of everyone present. Even Judge Caprio, known for his ability to balance humor with compassion, felt the shift in the room. He leaned forward slightly, his expression softening further. "Your mother's battling cancer?" he asked, his tone now devoid of humor and filled with genuine concern. Mark nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. She's in her 3rd round of chemotherapy. It's been hard. She's too weak to walk long distances, and the appointments are critical for her treatment." Judge Caprio's eyes briefly flicked to the audience, where a few people exchanged sympathetic glances. He returned his focus to Mark, his demeanor reflecting the weight of the situation. "I'm sorry to hear about your mother's illness, Mr. Harris. That must be incredibly challenging for both of you." Mark nodded again, his throat working as he tried to suppress the rising lump of emotion. "It is, Your Honor. But she's a fighter. She insists on going to every appointment, no matter how hard it is. I just want to make things easier for her, even if it means taking risks like parking where I shouldn't." Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled thoughtfully. "So, on that particular day, you parked in a no-parking zone to ensure she could get to her appointment without struggling. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Mark replied. "It was the only option I had. I didn't mean to break the law, but her health comes first." The judge nodded slowly, his expression one of understanding. And how is your mother doing now? Is she responding well to the treatment? Mark hesitated, his gaze dropping momentarily before he looked back up. Some days are better than others, he admitted. The treatments are taking a toll on her, but she's determined to keep fighting. She's my hero, Your Honor. A murmur of admiration rippled through the audience, the sincerity of Mark's words touching their hearts. Even the court officers, who had heard countless stories over the years, couldn't help but be moved by his quiet devotion. Judge Caprio tapped his pen lightly against the desk, his expression contemplative. "You know, Mr. Harris," he said, his voice carrying a note of gentle admonition, "parking laws are in place for a reason. But sometimes, life presents us with situations where following the rules feels almost impossible." Mark nodded, his face a mixture of gratitude and regret. "I understand, Your Honor. I never meant to disregard the law. I just didn't have another choice." Judge Caprio studied him for a moment, his gaze piercing yet kind. "It's clear to me, Mr. Harris, that you're a man who cares deeply for his family. Taking care of a loved one during such a difficult time is no easy task. It speaks volumes about your character." "Thank you, Your Honor," Mark replied, his voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot." The judge allowed a brief pause, letting the weight of the conversation settle before continuing. "Let's take a look at the specifics of this case," he said, shifting gears slightly. "How many parking violations are we talking about here?" "Just one, Your Honor," Mark answered quickly. "I've never had any issues before this." Judge Caprio glanced at the case file, confirming the details. "Indeed, it seems this is your first offense. Well, Mr. Harris, I've always believed that the law should be applied with a sense of humanity. Each case is unique, and context matters." He leaned forward again, his voice lowering slightly. "Let me ask you this. If you had to face the same situation again, knowing what you know now, what would you do?" Mark hesitated, his brow furrowing as he considered the question. "I'd probably make the same choice, Your Honor," he admitted, "because at the end of the day, my mother's health and comfort mean more to me than anything else." Judge Caprio smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting a mix of respect and understanding. "That's a noble answer, Mr. Harris, and it tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." The audience watched in rapt silence, the room filled with an almost palpable sense of empathy. Even those who had initially come for routine cases and minor infractions found themselves drawn into the depth of Mark's story. Judge Caprio straightened in his chair, his tone turning slightly more formal. "We'll address the specifics of this violation shortly, but before we do, I want to acknowledge the humanity behind this case. It's not just about a parking ticket, it's about the choices we make when faced with difficult circumstances. And sometimes, those choices transcend the letter of the law." Mark's eyes glistened with unshed tears, his gratitude evident in the slight nod of his head. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said softly. The judge offered a warm smile. "We'll see where this case takes us, Mr. Harris. But no matter what, you should hold your head high. Your actions were guided by love, and that's something worth respecting." The judge leaned back slightly, tapping his fingers gently on the armrest of his chair as he regarded Mark Harris. His gaze was steady but not intimidating, a hallmark of Judge Caprio's unique approach to justice. "So, Mr. Harris," he began, his tone carrying both curiosity and a hint of caution, "you're telling this court that you knowingly parked in a restricted zone because of your mother's health. That's a serious claim. Do you have any proof of her condition or the circumstances surrounding that day?" Mark's hands trembled slightly as he reached into a weathered folder he had brought with him. The papers inside were neatly organized, though the edges showed signs of frequent handling, a testament to their importance in his life. "Yes, sir," he replied, pulling out a small stack of documents. "These are her medical records, and this is the appointment slip from that day. I made sure to bring everything I thought you might need." The judge nodded toward the clerk, who approached Mark to retrieve the documents. As the clerk carried them back to the bench, the room fell into a hush, the only sounds being the faint rustle of paper and the soft murmur of the judge's thoughtful humming as he examined the records. Judge Caprio flipped through the documents methodically, his expression shifting subtly as he read. There was no sign of skepticism, only a growing understanding of the weight behind Mark's words. After a few moments, he set the papers down carefully, looking up at Mark with a softened expression. "These records are thorough," he said, his voice steady. "Your mother has been receiving treatment for a significant amount of time. It's clear you've been dealing with this for a while." Mark nodded, his throat tightening as he fought to maintain composure. "Yes, Your Honor. It's been almost 2 years since her diagnosis. The treatments, they take a lot out of her, but she refuses to give up. She says she's fighting for her family, for me." The judge nodded solemnly, his own expression tinged with respect. "She sounds like a remarkable woman, Mr. Harris, but let me ask you this. How long were you parked in that no-parking zone?" Mark straightened slightly, his voice unwavering despite the tremor in his hands. "About 15 minutes, Your Honor, just long enough to help her inside the building, get her checked in, and make sure she was comfortable." Judge Caprio's lips curled into a faint smile, his eyes twinkling with a hint of humor that often helped lighten the tension in his courtroom. 15 minutes, you say? You're not trying to pull a fast one on me to avoid paying this fine, are you, Mr. Harris? The courtroom chuckled softly at the judge's light-hearted remark, but Mark didn't smile. Instead, his voice cracked slightly as he responded, his sincerity cutting through the room like a blade. "No, sir," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I'd never do that. My mom, she means everything to me. If I have to pay a fine for this, I'll accept it. I just didn't want her to suffer because of a parking spot." The judge's playful expression softened immediately, replaced by a look of genuine compassion. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk. "Mr. Harris," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "it's not often I hear someone speak about their family with such conviction. You've made it very clear where your priorities lie, and that's commendable." Mark's gaze dropped to the floor, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his emotions. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said quietly. "I just want to do what's right for her. She's done so much for me in my life. This is the least I can do for her now." The judge nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering as he regarded the man before him. "Tell me, Mr. Harris," he said after a brief pause, "has this been a common occurrence? Parking in restricted zones to accommodate your mother's needs?" Mark shook his head quickly, his voice gaining a measure of strength. "No, sir. I always try to find a legal spot, even if it means we have to take extra time. But that day, the situation was different. The parking lot was full, and the closest legal spot was too far for her to walk. I didn't know what else to do." Judge Caprio steepled his fingers, his expression pensive. "So this was a one-time decision, made out of necessity?" "Yes, sir," Mark replied earnestly. "I'd never intentionally break the law unless I had no other choice. That day, it was about her, not me." The judge leaned back in his chair again, his hands resting on the armrests, as he allowed the room to sit in silence for a moment. The weight of Mark's words hung in the air, resonating with everyone present. Even the court officers and clerks, who had seen countless cases pass through these halls, seemed moved by the sincerity of the defendant's testimony. "Mr. Harris," Judge Caprio finally said, breaking the silence, "it's clear to me that your actions were motivated by love and necessity. That doesn't excuse breaking the law, but it does provide important context. And in this courtroom, context matters. Mark nodded, his voice barely audible, as he replied, "Thank you, Your Honor. That means a lot." The judge offered him a small, reassuring smile. "We're not finished here yet, Mr. Harris. There are still details to consider and decisions to make. But I want you to know that your honesty and devotion to your mother have not gone unnoticed." The courtroom remained hushed as Judge Caprio turned his attention back to the documents in front of him, carefully reviewing the details once more. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation, but there was an undeniable sense of respect for the man standing at the defendant's table, his love for his mother shining through every word he spoke. Judge Caprio leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the bench as he considered Mark Harris. "Tell me about your mother, Mr. Harris," he said gently, his voice taking on a softer tone. "What's her name? What kind of person is she?" Mark shifted slightly, his gaze falling to the table in front of him. He took a deep breath, his voice quiet but filled with emotion as he replied, "Her name's Linda, Your Honor. She's always been the strongest person I've ever known. After my dad passed away, she raised me and my sister all on her own. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to make sure we had everything we needed." The room was silent, the weight of Mark's words settling over everyone present. Even those who had entered the courtroom out of curiosity found themselves leaning forward, captivated by the depth of his story. Mark continued, his voice trembling slightly. "She never complained, not once. She'd come home late, exhausted, but she'd still ask about our day, help with homework, or make sure we had dinner. She always put us first, no matter what it cost her." Judge Caprio nodded slowly, his expression deeply thoughtful. "She sounds like a remarkable woman, Mr. Harris," he said, his tone carrying a sense of admiration. "It's clear that she's done everything in her power to take care of you and your sister." "She has, Your Honor," Mark said, his voice breaking slightly. He paused for a moment, struggling to compose himself before continuing. "Even now, with everything she's going through, the treatments, the pain, she still worries more about us than she does about herself." A murmur ran through the courtroom, a ripple of empathy passing through the audience. It was a rare moment of unity, where strangers, regardless of their backgrounds, collectively felt the weight of a family's struggle. Judge Caprio leaned forward a little further, his eyes fixed on Mark. "What's her situation now?" he asked gently. "How is she holding up?" Mark hesitated, his hands tightening around the edges of the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She's fighting, Your Honor. She's trying so hard to stay strong, but some days, it's just too much for her. The treatments leave her so weak that she can barely get out of bed. But even then, she refuses to let us see her break. She says she doesn't want us to worry, but I can see it. I see how much she's struggling." The judge's expression softened further, a hint of sadness flickering in his eyes. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mark," he said earnestly. "It's clear that she's a fighter, and it's equally clear that she's raised a son who cares deeply about her." Mark's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but he forced a faint smile. "She is a fighter, Your Honor, and that's why I'll do whatever it takes to make her life a little easier, even if it means breaking a parking rule." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. For a moment, it was as if time had stopped, the weight of Mark's love for his mother overshadowing everything else. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving Mark. "You know, Mr. Harris," he said after a pause, his voice carrying a mix of warmth and solemnity, "what you've shared here today isn't just a story about a parking ticket. It's a story about family, about sacrifice, and about the lengths we'll go to for the people we love. That's something that resonates deeply, not just with me, but with everyone in this room." Mark nodded, his voice trembling as he replied, "Thank you, Your Honor. That means a lot." The judge offered him a small, reassuring smile. "I'm not done deliberating yet, Mr. Harris," he said, "but I want you to know that your words have made an impact. You've reminded all of us of the importance of compassion, and that's something this courtroom will carry with it long after today." Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, his hands resting lightly on the bench as he addressed the courtroom. His voice carried the weight of contemplation, each word measured and deliberate. "This is one of those cases that makes you stop and think," he began, his gaze sweeping across the room. "On the one hand, rules are rules. They're the backbone of a fair and functioning society. They exist for a reason: to maintain order, ensure safety, and provide a framework that we all adhere to." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. The audience sat silently, their attention riveted to the judge's thoughtful reflection. "But, on the other hand," he continued, his tone softening, "what kind of society would we be if we punished someone for putting their loved ones first? If we turned a blind eye to the humanity of a situation, simply because it didn't fit neatly into the confines of the law?" The judge glanced at Mark, whose head was bowed slightly, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Mark here isn't a hardened criminal," Judge Caprio said, his voice carrying a note of warmth. "He's not someone who set out to flout the law for personal gain. He's a son, an ordinary man caught in extraordinary circumstances, doing everything in his power to care for his mother in her time of greatest need." The judge leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning the faces of the courtroom audience. "It's easy to pass judgment when you're not in someone else's shoes," he said, his voice tinged with quiet gravity. "From the outside looking in, it might seem simple to say, he broke the law, so he should pay the price. But life is rarely that black and white." Judge Caprio's gaze returned to Mark. "When I see you, Mark, I see a man burdened by a choice no one should have to make. Do you follow the rules and leave your mother to struggle, or do you bend them in an effort to ease her suffering? It's a moral dilemma as much as a legal one." The audience remained silent, captivated by the judge's words. Some nodded subtly, their expressions reflecting understanding and empathy. Judge Caprio exhaled slowly, his tone introspective. "Compassion and justice are not always easy to reconcile," he said, "but they're both essential pillars of our society. Without rules, there's chaos. Without compassion, there's cruelty." He turned back to the documents Mark had provided earlier, his fingers brushing lightly over the stack of papers. "It's cases like this," he said, his voice quieter now, "that remind me why I do what I do. Every person who comes before this bench has a story. Some stories are simple, others are complex, and some, like yours, Mark, make us question the very foundations of fairness." The judge straightened, his expression resolute yet kind. "The law may not always bend to accommodate every human need, but as a judge, it's my responsibility to interpret it with humanity and wisdom. The decision I make here today won't just affect you, Mark. It will set an example for everyone watching, a reminder of what justice truly means." The room seemed to hold its breath as Judge Caprio fell silent, his thoughtful gaze fixed on Mark. It was a moment of profound reflection, one that underscored the delicate balance between the letter of the law and the spirit of justice. Just as the atmosphere in the courtroom settled, Judge Caprio leaned forward, appearing ready to deliver his verdict. The weight of his thoughtful deliberation hung in the air. However, before he could utter another word, the courtroom clerk approached, handing him a small note. The judge unfolded the paper, his eyebrows lifting slightly in surprise as he read its contents. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, and he looked up, scanning the room before addressing Mark. "Well, Mr. Harris," he began, his voice carrying a hint of astonishment, "it seems we have an unexpected development." Mark frowned slightly, confused. "Your Honor?" Judge Caprio set the note down and folded his hands on the bench. "It appears," he said, pausing for effect, "that someone in this courtroom has offered to pay your fine." A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by a hushed murmur of astonishment. Mark's eyes widened, his head swiveling slightly as he tried to process the words. "Wait. What?" he stammered, disbelief evident in his voice. "Who would do that?" The judge smiled warmly and gestured to the back of the courtroom. All eyes turned to an older woman sitting quietly in the last row. She looked to be in her late 60s, her silver hair neatly tied back, her hands clasped in her lap. Though her demeanor was modest, there was a palpable strength in her presence. "Mrs. Thompson," Judge Caprio said, addressing her directly, "has offered to cover your fine. She mentioned that she knows all too well what it's like to care for a sick loved one, and how difficult it can be to make ends meet under those circumstances." The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the walls, as the unexpected act of kindness brought an undeniable energy to the space. People nodded, clapped, and some even wiped away tears. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of shared humanity, a poignant reminder of the power of compassion. Mark turned in his seat to face Mrs. Thompson, his face a mixture of shock, gratitude, and overwhelming emotion. He rose slowly, his voice choked with tears as he spoke. "Thank you," he managed, his words barely audible over the applause. He cleared his throat, his voice stronger now. "Thank you so much. I don't know what to say." Mrs. Thompson gave him a kind smile, her eyes glistening. "You don't need to say anything, young man," she said, her voice gentle but resolute. "I've been where you are. I lost my husband to cancer many years ago, and I know how hard it is to keep going when everything feels like it's falling apart. If I can make it even a little easier for you, it's the least I can do." Mark's shoulders shook as he tried to suppress the sob that threatened to escape. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice cracking. "But, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you." The judge, observing the emotional exchange, nodded approvingly. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect, "your generosity is a testament to the kind of community we should all strive to be a part of. Thank you for reminding us of the power of empathy." He turned his attention back to Mark, his expression soft but serious. "Mark, it's moments like these that remind us that we're not alone, even in our struggles. Mrs. Thompson's act of kindness isn't just about paying your fine. It's about sending a message that compassion can make all the difference." Mark nodded, his voice steady, but filled with emotion as he replied, "I'll never forget this day, Your Honor. And I'll never forget Mrs. Thompson's kindness. I promise, when I'm able, I'll pay it forward." The applause swelled again, and for a moment, the courtroom was united in a shared sense of hope and humanity. Even those who had entered the room as strangers left feeling a little more connected, inspired by the unexpected turning point in Mark's case. Judge Caprio raised his hand gently, calling for silence. The murmurs in the courtroom slowly faded, replaced by an expectant hush. His eyes settled warmly on Mark, then on Mrs. Thompson, before he spoke with a tone that blended both authority and deep compassion. "Mark," he began, his voice steady but kind, "today, you've shown us what it truly means to put family first. Your actions, driven by love and necessity, remind us that sometimes life places us in situations where the right choice isn't always the easiest one." He paused, letting those words resonate with everyone present. You are fortunate to have encountered such kindness and generosity here today, the judge continued, nodding toward Mrs. Thompson. Her compassion is a beacon for us all, a reminder that in a world governed by rules, humanity must never be forgotten. Turning back to Mark, Judge Caprio's expression softened even further. Because of these circumstances and the strength of your character, I am waiving your fine entirely. This court recognizes the difficult choices you've faced, and today, justice will reflect not only the law, but the heart behind your actions. A collective sigh of relief and joy swept through the courtroom. Some wiped away tears, others smiled broadly, and a few exchanged looks of quiet gratitude for the judge's thoughtful decision. The judge then addressed Mrs. Thompson directly. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, for your generosity and for reminding us all of the power of compassion in our community. The older woman nodded humbly, a gentle smile gracing her lips. Judge Caprio looked around the room, his voice rising just enough to bring everyone together one last time. Let this case serve as a reminder to us all. Laws are important, but so is understanding the stories behind them. Sometimes, mercy and kindness must guide our actions as much as the statutes on the page. With that, he brought his gavel down firmly, but with a warmth that filled the room. This case is dismissed. A burst of applause followed, heartfelt and sustained, as Mark breathed a sigh of relief, tears of gratitude shining in his eyes. The courtroom had witnessed not just a legal proceeding, but a moment of humanity, and it was one they would not soon forget. Mark stepped out of the courtroom with a heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The weight of anxiety and uncertainty that had burdened him began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of hope. The kindness he had witnessed, the judge's understanding, Mrs. Thompson's generosity, would stay with him forever, a beacon during the hardest moments ahead. Outside, Mark reached for his phone and dialed his mother's number. When her voice came through, warm and familiar, his spirit lifted even higher. "Mom, the court, it's over," he said softly. Her laughter on the other end was like a balm, light, joyful, and unburdened by the troubles that had shadowed their days. It was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard, a reminder of why he fought so hard. This story, though it began with a simple parking violation, is really about so much more. It's about the difficult choices we make every day and the incredible people who inspire us to keep going. Judge Caprio's wisdom teaches us that justice isn't only about rules, but about understanding and mercy. Mrs. Thompson's generosity shows the profound impact of kindness, even from strangers. And Mark's unwavering devotion to his mother is a testament to the strength found in love. Every act of compassion sends ripples outward, touching lives in ways we often don't see. It's a reminder that sometimes the law can be tempered with heart, and that makes all the difference. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. Share your own experiences of kindness and compassion, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more uplifting courtroom moments. Together, we can keep spreading hope, one story at a time.